So off we go. Yeah, again, thank you all for coming. Just to kind of note first that the goal of the materials that I'll be talking about is to make them as accessible as possible. The balance that I've been trying to tread here is that the analysis is somewhat complicated and it does require some understanding of what's going on underneath. So I will try to explain a little bit about the steps that are required. We will be working in a coding platform in R, which I know is not entirely accessible. It's going to be quite a steep learning curve if you're not already familiar with that area, but I will try to, well, what I've done is to try and make that as simple as possible so that it is doable at this stage. Going forward, if there is demand and we need to make it even more accessible, we can consider making a non-coding graphical interface for people to use. But we need to think about how sensible that is, because the downside is that necessarily involves some sort of putting the detail into kind of boxes where you have to make some of the decisions for the analyst, which might be better made by the individual. But we can have that discussion. So it'd be good to get your feedback on whether you feel what we have at the moment is possible for you, or whether you would need something that's more accessible based on a graphical interface. So yeah, please do feed that back as you start using it. So I want to start a step back from the analysis, in fact, to emphasize a couple of points about digitizing the information within AGOUTI. So as you'll have seen, we've had sessions on how to digitize calibration images and animal positions within images. There may be a few things which haven't been mentioned, or perhaps need a bit of re-emphasis on some of the decisions you make about how to do that. So I want to just start back at the AGOUTI stage. So let me first share my screen. Okay, so this is the AGOUTI screen for annotation. So hopefully you are somewhat familiar with this by now. So the first point that I want to make is that it's important to be able to tell whether or not the pole is resting on the ground. If you digitize calibration images when the pole is not on the ground, it'll be a problem for trying to create the deployment calibrations then that tell us about where animals are in the image. So let me show you an example. This image here looks like it might be a good one to digitize. You can see the pole. We can see we've got the two bands which represent 40 centimeters above ground, then the three bands above that. So we've got two positions we can digitize. However, if I go one step forward, I just click back and forth between those, we can see the next image, the pole is actually further down. So that first image, the pole was clearly not on the ground. And if I go forward again, okay, so that one, I can be pretty sure that the image has reached the ground at that stage. Sometimes if I'd just seen that image, I really wouldn't be sure. So I would choose not to digitize that because I couldn't be sure that it was on the ground. At this stage, I can see it go down, and then another couple of images later, it's still there. So I'm fairly sure it's hit the ground. In practice, it's a good idea to have some sort of signal in the way that you're placing the poles to indicate when the pole is on the ground. So you can maybe have a hand symbol, hand gesture that you show to the camera once the pole is on the ground, but you only show it whilst the pole is on the ground. Does that all make sense? I should say at any point, if I'm unclear or you want to ask questions or make a comment, please just unmute yourself and shout, because I won't necessarily see hand raised. So yeah, please just shout. Okay, so I hope that's clear. The second point I wanted to make about digitizing calibration pole images is that it's very easy to make a mistake when you put in the heights of the image. So here you can see that I digitized 40 centimeters and 60 centimeters above the ground, 0.4 and 0.6 meters, and I've put those into the relevant boxes here. So just a plea to really double check those. So maybe once you've digitized a set of pole images, maybe just flip back through them, and that's easy to do. You can sorry, at this point here, you can quickly flick through the pole digitizations, and if you look at just quickly double check against what you see in the image against the numbers that you put into the boxes to make sure they're all correct. It'll save you potentially some trouble down the line. So I would suggest that you do that. Okay, so thinking then about animal digitizations. So let me go to, okay, here's a sequence with some animals in. Here's a fox coming through the image. So in this case, I can't see exactly where the animal is, so this is quite a tricky one. What I chose to do in this case was to digitize, you can see which one this is, I've digitized outside the image about here. So I've had to make a guess about that. When the animal is very close to the image, it's not very sensitive to quite large variations in exactly where you put the point. If it's far away, you need to be much more careful. The main thing is to err on the side of being further down the image than you think. So what I generally find is that if you can't see the feet, I go forward here. So at this point, I'm starting to be able to see where the animal is. So you can see where the red cross is, that's where the current image is digitized. I'm still making a guess, but I think that the key thing is to, when you can't see the feet, generally it means that where the feet touch the ground, generally the point of ground contact tends to be, I find, lower down the image than you might think. So the tendency is to digitize somewhere on the animal that you can actually see, which I think you should be able to see my cursor looks about there. That will be too high. The feet are actually touching the ground somewhere down here. So you need to try and project where the feet are on the ground based on your knowledge of the animal anatomy. If you know that's a fox, you've got a rough idea of what the fox anatomy looks like, I hope. So I've chosen to digitize it about there. Fox is actually jumping there, so that's a tricky one. Arguably that point is a bit too high. I might actually prefer it somewhere a bit further down, and so on. Hopefully that makes sense. The next thing is that you need to be aware of multiple observations within sequences. So the AGOUTI splits the data into sequences on the basis of sorry, could I just ask everyone to mute if you're not speaking? Got some background noise going on. That would be great. So sorry, the point I was making is that AGOUTI splits the data or the sets of images into sequences, which are defined automatically on the basis of an interval, which you define. It's by default 2 minutes, I think. So that means you might have an animal moving in and out of the detection zone, and then another observation of an animal moving in and out within the same sequence. Okay, so I've got an example of that here. This is the sequence that I started with, started here. I'm in the same sequence, the animal oh, what's going on? Sorry. Right, okay, so Took a while to catch up there. So here's the animal moving through. If you watch the timestamp, we're all within the same time, roughly 1906, 46, 47. So that's all one observation within a sequence. The next one, the next observation, I've got possibly the same fox coming back, but if you notice the timestamp, the last time was 1906, 47. The next one is 1907, 57. So that's a little over a minute later. So that might be the same animal, but that doesn't matter. That is almost certainly an animal that left the detection zone and then came back. So that is a new observation. Okay, so that's my second observation in the list here. So this is now a new observation. It doesn't join on to the last one. Okay, and we can see that it's, you know, the animal is in a very different position from where it left. Sometimes it's not the same, you know, as obvious in terms of where the animal is in the image. It might be that just by chance, a new animal or the same animal that left and came back appears again in roughly the same position, and it can be quite confusing. It may look like the same observation. The key thing is to keep an eye on the timestamp. If it's any more than a few seconds, the probability is that it left the detection zone and came back, and you should start a new observation. Okay, so there's a little bit of judgment required there. The key thing is that if you have observations where you've continuously digitized a movement path, where in fact the animal had left the detection zone and there's a big gap in time of many seconds or even minutes, a minute or more, that's going to create bias in your density estimates ultimately. So please be careful with that. If in doubt, start a new observation.
Marcus, may I interrupt you?
Yes, please.
I think Patrick has something to comment.
Yeah.
Marcus, my question is, so I find this placement terrible because it's
I
all
agree.
this vegetation.
I agree. It's an awful placement. I should have said that.
So suppose that you have a placement like this, and then you see as a consequence it's very difficult to track an animal without lots of guessing. It's also, you can calibrate it still, the view, but it will be very difficult to track the individual. Would it then be okay to skip it?
Yeah.
I know you picked it because of this example, having two individuals, but would it be okay to skip it, saying, hey, this deployment, or at least this sequence, is not going to provide us with reliable estimates, so I choose to skip it? Or I might then, if I were to do that, would I then introduce some sort of bias to the study?
No, I think the risk of bias is low. So yeah, that's a really good point. So you're right that I picked this one because it illustrated a couple of points that I wanted to make, but it is a nasty deployment. So the problem is potentially if your habitat tends to be like that across the whole study site, and therefore pretty much all of your deployments are like this. Hopefully that doesn't happen very often, but if that's the case, and you are skipping this in every case, then that's going to be a problem because you'll end up with very little usable data. So there has to be a kind of balance. I think if the deployment isn't great, but at least some of the record, the observations within that you feel you can make use of, then I think it's better to salvage them. But again, that's a judgment call you have to make.
Okay, thank you. So Joaquin, I would be interested to know after the course, how many people who already took cameras from the field and looked at the photos have deployments like this with lots of clutter of the view? That would be interesting to know. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so once you've finished all this, so you've if I go back to my list of annotations, there's one needing a bit more annotation here, but generally, hopefully that list will be empty, or at least the only ones appearing there be ones where you haven't been able to, you felt that you've only got records which you can't reasonably get a good digitization on. So you're ready to export your data. So you go to the link at the bottom here, which is, I've already got lots of data exports here where I've been testing it, but at this point you should be able to click the Create Export button. And you'll see that started. So my latest export today is now going. I mentioned that I'm finding that ball just keeps spinning indefinitely. So it'll take a little while. So that's I don't know, a large data set, I suspect, may actually take a substantial time. So you might want to go and make a cup of tea at this point, or coffee.
Can I ask you a question while we are waiting?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Just for to be clear, because we are talking about digitizing images, are we choosing only the foremost leg, never mind left or right? This is from the last time, but I didn't understand clearly. Or we are choosing just one leg, for example, only right one.
It doesn't actually matter. I mean, I think the
Yes, I thought so, but just to ask.
Sure, no, good point. I think the guidance you've received is to use the front leg. Is that right? A foreleg? Is that right, Patrick? I'm
not sure if the foremost left or right, or only the foremost right.
In the previous course, we said the foremost leg, so the leg that is on the ground, as much as well, the leg most in front, but on the ground. But if you were to do the same leg,
yes,
one of the two front legs throughout, that would basically give a very similar result. Would be a little bit less precise, maybe, but because yes, the animal can move while having the same feet on the ground, right?
Yes, I feel that this doesn't matter at all, but just to be sure.
Yeah, if you still can choose, better take the frontmost leg that is on the ground. That gives you the most precise track.
Okay, what's important is that it is on the ground, not in the air.
Yes, because on the ground it's crucial, and the other thing is that it is consistent within an observation, a set of points within an observation. So if you see an animal where the front right leg doesn't seem ideal because it's it's off the ground a lot of the time, but the left leg looks easier to keep track of on the ground, then use the left leg. That's no problem, but just then stick to that throughout the sequence. The observation, I should say.
Thank you very much. Sorry for the interruption.
Yeah, no, not at all. Please do. So I refresh my screen and the export has finished. So now I can click the download here, and that you'll get a zip file that appears in your downloads folder. So if I look at my downloads folder, I've now got this folder here. I should be able to extract that then. If I extract here, you'll see we get a bunch of CSV, comma delimited text files that contain the data. There are also some other files in there. We don't actually need to look inside that, but just to show you that there's a complete data package here. The point is that it's structured in a very particular way that the analysis tools that we'll be using can easily interrogate, so it knows exactly where to look for all the relevant information. What I'm actually going to do now is shift to working with the example data that I sent you.